So this weekend is, not including Sunday, but tonight and tomorrow is actually a confidential discussion. Because any topics about Krishna's pleasure potency, Srimati Radharani, are the most elevated in Bhakti Yoga. The whole 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam are preparing you for Krishna's sweetness, his sweetness pastimes. You need 9 cantos of Bhagavatam. Just think. 9 cantos of Bhagavatam just to prepare you. Because you can make so many mistakes upon hearing about Krishna's confidential pastimes. You can think, oh, I know what that's all about. I experience that, I see that in the material world. So Krishna's pastimes, his romantic pastimes must be material. But actually the reverse is true. What we are pursuing in terms of relationships in the material world is relative to the relationships going on in the absolute world, the world of pure spirit. So sometimes people say that human beings have imagined, they projected from their affairs into the spiritual, the so-called spiritual world. When actually the reverse is true. Our puny, temporary, often pathetic attempts at relationships in the material world are based on the reality that's in the spiritual world. You know the example Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita. About the banyan tree on the side of the river. When it's reflected into the river, what's up is down, the top is the bottom is the top. So the topmost activities in the spiritual world, when distorted into the material world, become the lowest activities. Now, we know that the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam says, Janmadi Yasataha. The supreme absolute truth is that from which everything emanates. Everything means everything. So why should you be astonished to hear that Krishna can be a playboy? The tendency is there in the material world. It must be there perfectly and purely in Krishna. Otherwise, how is Krishna perfect and complete? The Bhagavatam says everything emanates from the supreme absolute truth. Everything means everything. Dancing, romance, partying. But in the material world, with material bodies, everything is frustration, temporary, insubstantial, distorted. So it takes 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam to prepare us for the smiling face of Krishna. That is the 10th canto. The first canto is like the feet of Krishna. Traditionally, in a real human culture, which we don't have these days, you approach someone respectfully by starting looking at their feet, and then you lift you lift your gaze upward to the face finally. Of course, that's not the way these days. As they say, immediately someone wants to get into your face. But in Vedic culture, there's always a respectful way to approach respectable persons. So the 10th canto is the smiling face of Krishna. Therefore, we begin with the first canto, the feet, and gradually we progress upwards. So we have some top drawer subject matters to discuss. Preparation for our Radhastami celebration tomorrow. The appearance day, we're celebrating it tomorrow. The appearance of Krishna's pleasure potency personified. Now what do you think of that? Pleasure potency personified. Actually, we all, because we're part of Krishna, we have a tiny amount of pleasure potency in us. That's why everyone's seeking pleasure, yes? Who will deny? Your purpose in the material world is seeking pleasure, and part of that hunt is to combat distress. And the hunt to combat distress is so problematic that if you think for a moment, I don't have any distress, you think, that's happiness. I don't have any distress. Things are all right for a day or two. So because we are tiny parts of the Supreme, we have a bit of pleasure potency in us. But Krishna has it unlimitedly. So just think, be practical. You try to enjoy, you try to have good times, you want pleasing sensations, pleasing experiences, pleasantries. That hankering in you is because you have a tiny part of the pleasure potency in you. But Krishna has that pleasure potency unlimitedly, infinitely. So perhaps now you can begin to fathom why it is a great disaster to consider that ultimately the Supreme is impersonal. Because that would mean there are no relationships in the Supreme Reality. This is all pervasive oneness. But you want relationships. In your frustration, you'll deny it. Never again. But still, in the core of the being, there's this desire for relationship. So by considering the ultimate source, the Supreme Reality, to be impersonal, what are you going to do? What generally happens is you decide, let me stick to the material world, rotten as it is. At least there can be some loving exchanges temporarily. Whereas the ultimate reality is just no relationships, no qualities, no activities. Out of frustration, you'll temporarily choose that. I'm so sick of relationships. I'm so sick of qualities and activities. I just want to zone out, zonk out. Tired of living my life. Tired of being an individual. But that's out of frustration. It can't last for long. So by considering the ultimate reality to be impersonal, we do ourselves the greatest disfavor. Because then we're forced onto the material plane to pursue our fortune in trying to squeeze relationship flavors out of the temporary material body, the temporary material world. So even those who understand something of Vedic knowledge, like the various incarnations of the Supreme Personality Godhead, they can still have a difficult time understanding Swayam Bhagavan, Krishna in his original form. 2 hands, looking human-like, having human-like activities, Nara Leela, but at the same time demonstrating so inarguably that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. More difficult to understand than Krishna is Krishna's pleasure potency personified, Srimati Radharani. Why shouldn't Krishna have girlfriends? But no material bodies, no material personalities, pure spirit. Therefore, Krishna never has any problem with his relationships. His relationships have nothing to do with the material energy or material bodies. But we think we're very smart. I know a material situation when I see it. I've experienced material relationships, and I'm turning to the Supreme Absolute Truth for relief. The negation of all that, that'll be peace and bliss. When I negate any personal variegatedness, any personal qualities, activities, any forms, just give me formlessness, qualitylessness, activitylessness, personalityless. Yes. Krishna is the energetic source, and he has energies, multi-energies. Because people do not have the scientific knowledge of the Supreme, they don't understand that the Supreme Source has energies, just like the sun has heat and light. To declare that Krishna is impersonal, ultimately, means no energies. But Krishna is a person that wields his energies. You can see that in you, the tiny part and parcel in this material world. You try to manipulate the material energy. You can try because you are the superior energy. You're the spirit soul. And the material energy, matter, is inferior. So you, the superior energy, the spiritual energy, try to manipulate matter and enjoy in that way. Krishna never makes that mistake. Krishna never attempts to enjoy matter, even though matter is his energy. But we tend to become overwhelmed by ignorance, and we try to enjoy matter. So what does Krishna do when he wants to enjoy? He doesn't turn to matter, although Krishna can easily turn all matter into spirit. What does Krishna do when he wants to enjoy? He has his own pleasure energy, which is unlimited. Now you can understand why you fail in your enjoying attempts. Your pleasure energy is so tiny, so fragile, so insignificant. You may have these big desires. Oh, yes, I want this, I want that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But then you notice there's always a problem. There's always some temporariness to it all. There's always some distortion. Things just don't work out. Sooner or later, that reality becomes manifest. Because our pleasure potency is so tiny. But Krishna, for that same pleasure pursuit, has an infinite pleasure potency. Perfect. Krishna doesn't even think what he wants to do to enjoy. The pleasure potency, his pleasure potency knows already. Ah, let me arrange enjoyment for you. This is why in our ordinary relationships in this world, we have these hopes. I want to be with someone who knows what I'm thinking before I think it. I want a partner who knows what I feel before I feel it. We're trying to imitate Krishna, who has a pleasure energy that does that for him. It's his energy. Krishna's pleasure potency manages his pleasure affairs. So you might say, well, all that is great for Krishna, but what about us? But just by your hearing about Krishna's pleasure activities, you become purified of material desires and you become connected to what is real pleasure, the spiritual pleasure. Just by hearing about Krishna's enjoying affairs, if you hear with the right frame of mind. So the whole purpose of the 9 cantos in Bhagavatam, before Canto 10, is to prepare you to hear about Krishna properly, authoritatively. The qualification is that you're hearing from a proper source and that you're ready. The soil has to be fertile and the right seed has to be planted into the fertile soil. And then, just by hearing about Krishna's romantic pastimes, you lose your desire to imitate him and have your own. It takes preparation to get to that stage for when you can take that cure. Just like with Ayurvedic medicine, I've often explained. There are very powerful medicines in Ayurveda, but you can't take them until your system is ready. So first you have to build up your system. Even there are Western medicines like that. Very powerful pharmaceuticals. The doctors say, well, first you have to get stronger, then we'll administer this medicine, which will cure everything. So hearing about Krishna's romantic pastimes and his pleasure potency is like that. You have to be ready for that cure. So because there's such danger in mistaking Krishna's activities, his confidential, his romantic activities to be mundane, to be material, we don't often speak about this in public. But actually tonight and tomorrow are not really public days. They're meant for our nourishing the staff, nourishing the community of full-time practitioners who have all read Bhagavad Gita. So our devotees are practitioners that they need to hear about Krishna. And they need the mercy of Srimati Radharani. So we're going to discuss today Srila Prabhupada's introduction to Chaitanya Charitamrita. The introduction is compiled from lectures he gave in the early days of ISKCON on 26 2nd Avenue. And I find this introduction to be very profound, of course, in that it encapsulates what Krishna's doing with a girlfriend and how that Krishna and his girlfriend combine to come as Lord Chaitanya. Why does Krishna, the ultimate source, combine with his pleasure potency? And the two become one, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Why is that? So we'll discuss. But first we'll chant our verse for today, which gives you some insight into where we're going. I don't have my glasses, so let's see if I can successfully read this. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda.
Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda.
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaur Bhakta Vrinda.
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda.
Alright, I'll do my best without glasses. Apadam kasyapi pranai janavindasya kutuhi. Rasastomam hitva maduram upabhaktum kamapiya. Rucham swam avare jutim iha tadiyam prakatayan. Sadeva Chaitanya Kritir Atitaramna Kripayutu. Aparam Kasyapi Pranayi Jana Vrindasya Kutuki. Rasastomam Hitva Madhuram Upabhaktum Kamapiya. Rujam Swam Avavre Jutim Tadiyam Padik Prakatayan. Sadevas Chaitanya Katir Atitaram Na Kripayutu. Apalam Kasyapi Pranayi Jana Vrindasya Kutuki. Rasastomam Hitva Maduram Upabhaktum Kamapiya. Rujam Swam Avare Jutim Iha Tadiyam Prakatayan. Sadevas Chaitanya Kritir Atitaramna Kripayutu.
Aparam kasyapi pranayi jana vrindasya kutuki. Rasastomam ritva madhuram upabhuktam kamapiya.
Vaishnavis. Aparam, boundless, kasya api, of someone, pranay jana vrindasya, of the multitude of lovers, kutuki, one who is curious, rasastomam, the group of mellows, krita, stealing, maduram, sweet, upabhaktum, to enjoy, kamapi, some, ya, who, rucham, luster, swam, own, avare, covered, dutim, luster, eha, here, tadiyam, related to him, prakatayan, manifesting, sa, he, deva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Chaitanya Akriti, having the form of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Atitaram, greatly, na, unto us, kripaya tu, may he show his mercy. Translation. Lord Krishna desired to taste the limitless nectarian mellows of the love of one of his multitude of loving damsels, Sri Radha. And so he has assumed the form of Lord Chaitanya. He has tasted that love while hiding his own dark complexion with her effulgent yellow color. May that Lord Chaitanya confer upon us his grace. So in the purport, there's a reference that this verse is from a compilation called Stavamala by Srila Rupa Goswami. Om Agana Chimadandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Viradhara Sivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So you may wonder why, for introducing us to Sri Radhastami, the appearance day of Srimati Radharani, we're speaking from Chaitanya Charitamrita and particularly about a verse that mentions Lord Chaitanya. But we should realize that there's practically no hope in understanding Radha Krishna, Srimati Radharani in this age of Kali, age of darkness, without going through Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We've often explained how There's so much misunderstanding about Krishna. Even in India, the so-called land of Krishna, people don't exactly know who is Krishna, what is Krishna's full identity. And the confusion is because they're not approaching Krishna through Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They're not trying to understand Radha Krishna Leela, the loving pastimes, the loving affairs of Radha and Krishna, by going through Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So therefore, even in India, so much confusion about who is Krishna. Some say he's the Hindu forest of God. Others say he was a powerful warrior. So many misunderstandings, so many concoctions. Or he's the representative of the impersonal Brahman. The impersonal Brahman has given rise to a material form, a highest material form known as Krishna. So many crazy statements like that. And what to speak of understanding, trying to understand Krishna's loving affairs. The verse mentions he desired to taste, Krishna desired to taste the limitless nectarian mellows, flavors, of the love of one of his multitude of loving damsels. Multitude means infinite, by the way, not, 10 or 20 or 30. Everything Krishna does is unlimited. He is unlimited. His associates are unlimited. That means his girlfriends are also unlimited. What? Amongst the playboys, the youthful union, how many concerts could they deal with? A handful at one time. They took great pride in that. Oh, I'm a lover. Of course, these days the girls play the game too. It's like ego contest. How many can you conquer? Krishna has unlimited, infinite consorts. And he has the unlimited, infinite ability to satisfy every one of his infinite consorts. So if you're going to accuse Krishna of having desire for girlfriends, then you have to be truthful in your accusation and say he's got an infinite desire for infinite girlfriends, because nothing Krishna does is limited. And as we explained earlier, Krishna never makes the mistake that we make of trying to enjoy the material energy. Krishna doesn't dance with material bodies. And Krishna's Vrindavan can arrange that on the bank of the Yamuna, Krishna is dancing with billions of girlfriends. Billions. And each one thinks Krishna is paying so much attention just to me. If there's not romance in the ultimate source, how is it then in the material world, which is an emanation of the ultimate source? Krishna has love affairs, but they have nothing to do. These affairs have nothing to do with the material energy. You say that you're interested in spiritual life, spirituality. Very good. But do you understand that means you're acknowledging that there's a spiritual energy? And that there's spiritual energy means there's spiritual forms, spiritual qualities, spiritual activities, spiritual personalities. No, you don't want to go that far. No. But I'm into spirituality. By saying like that, you'll simply end up in material life like everyone else. What is your alternative? It's just ego to talk about, I'm going to merge into the oneness, the lightest light in the darkest night. Beyond all words, beyond all description. You can talk like that with your ego, but what happens when it's time for pleasure? Sooner or later, you have to resort to the material platform. So it's very important that the goal of Bhakti Yoga is to dance with Krishna, to be Krishna's friend, to be Krishna's parent, to be Krishna's servant. Otherwise, you have no higher goal to aspire to. You want relationships, you want pleasure, you want fun. I often point out how practically, yes, he was the most powerful Christian preacher of the 20th century. He would, all over the world, he would speak to sports stadiums full of 50,000 people, and he would enthrall them. And he was asked, what are you going to do when you go to heaven? He said, I'm going to drive on golden brick roads in a yellow Cadillac. And I'll be attending parties hosted by angels. Yet if we present, what about Krishna and his loving affairs, his dancing with billions of gopis on the bank of the Yamuna? Oh, mythology, primitive Hindu mythology. Just think, whatever you'd like to do, Krishna does it perfectly, infinitely. In our envy, we don't want to hear that. Give me my own loving affairs. Give me my own consorts. And for that, you have to work so hard, struggle, just for that futile attempt to enjoy. And even if you manage to get what you want, what happens? It's all snatched away at the time of death. This is frustration. So let's go to the introduction of Chaitanya Charitamrita. For not bringing my glasses. I wanted to start in a particular place. Yes. All right. We have often heard the phrase, love of Godhead. Actually, Srila Prabhupada's being very charitable because we haven't often heard that. Here in New Zealand, you know, bump into people who say, love of Godhead. You don't even bump into people who say anything about practically anything theistic. No one wants to say anything. And if someone does mention, how about love of God? You run in the opposite direction. We have often heard the phrase love of Godhead. How far this love of Godhead can actually be developed can be learned from the Vaishnava philosophy. Theoretical knowledge of love of God can be found in many places and in many scriptures, but what that love of Godhead actually is and how it is developed can be found in the Vaishnava literatures. It is the unique and highest development of love of God that is given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we already discussed how it's very difficult to understand Krishna, and even more difficult to understand Krishna's loving affairs unless you go through Krishna as Lord Chaitanya. So in the religious platitudes of the world, you'll hear mention of serving God, loving God, but you never find out, well, tell me, what is the nature of God? People will just say, God is love. Well, how can there be love without some understanding in depth of the relationship? What's the lover and the beloved? What do they do? What are the qualities that they're tasting in each other? What's the attraction? So because this knowledge is missing, people just turn to mundane relationships as the all in all. And they beg, oh God, if you exist, please help me to have a fun relationship with this one or that one. In one sense, you can't blame people for thinking like that. If there is God, He is our order supplier. He facilitates our enjoyment. Oh God, give me this. Oh God, give me that. Like the song of the 60s before your time. Oh God, please give me a Mercedes-Benz. My friends all have BMWs. I must make amends. You remember that one? I knew it. We're old enough to remember that one. So who would ever think that Krishna has romance? If we're going to be religious, then we'll think, oh God, help me in my romance with this one or that one. The last thing we would think is that this God we may be praying to has his own loving affairs. How many of you would think that before coming in contact with Srimad Bhagavatam? How many would think, no, you just knew something's not right in this world. Something's not right with me. I'm missing some connection. So this is the unique gift of the Bhakti Yoga knowledge. What is the supreme and how to have the love supreme? What is Krishna doing? You say God is love, but you never think that God has got his loving affairs with his pure lovers. When you say God is love, you mean God should give me some good loving. With this one or that one. I'll continue to read. Even in this material world, we can have a little sense of love. How is this possible? It is due to the presence of our original love of God. Whatever we find within our experience within this conditioned life is situated in the Supreme Lord, who is the ultimate source of everything. We already discussed first verse of Bhagavatam, first line, Janmadya Sutta. The Supreme Absolute Truth is that from which everything emanates. Everything means everything. In our original relationship with the Supreme Lord, there is real love, and that love is reflected pervertedly through material conditions. Our real love is continuous and unending, but because that love is reflected pervertedly in this material world, it lacks continuity and is inebriating. Inebriating is Old English usage. Won't find it so much in current dictionaries. It means problematic. So just think, our real loving emanation, so to speak, we have this loving Shakti, this loving energy. It's continuous and unending originally in its spiritual expression, but expressed through the material world, it becomes distorted and problematic. So this is what frustrates you. You want to love. You've got that energy, but it manifests problematically. And you can't figure it out. What's going on? I just want to love and be loved. The problem is the material atmosphere, which distorts everything. It's like rainwater. Before the rainwater hits the soil, hits the earth, it's, relatively speaking, it's pure. But then as it comes through the polluted atmosphere, the rainwater picks up pollutants. And what to speak of when the rainwater hits the ground, and there's so many chemicals and polluted things on the ground. So the rainwater, although originally pure, relatively speaking, becomes polluted, because the rainwater is falling through the polluted material atmosphere, and then it hits the earth. So our original loving urge is pure. And as we just heard, it's continuous in its expression, unending. In other words, you're never going to get over your desire to love and be loved. You may try to deny it. You may stomp on it. You may try to cut it up. But it's always going to be there. The problem is distortion. Because you're expressing the original spiritual urge to love and be loved. You're expressing that in the material energy, in material bodies and material minds. If we want real transcendental love, we have to transfer our love to the supreme lovable object, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the basic principle of Krishna consciousness, transferring your love. You can't deny your loving propensity, but you have to transfer it. And that's the whole process of Bhakti Yoga. And by aiming your love at Krishna, you successfully love everyone, because Krishna contains everyone. The example you know from 4th Canto Bhagavatam. By watering the tree at the root, all the branches and leaves of the tree benefit. But if you try to water each leaf individually, that's not the process for watering the tree. The tree drinks water through its roots. The example Prabhupada would always give. You want to nourish the body, you put the food in the mouth, not in the ear, not in the nose. One time even went, not here. You put the food in your mouth. In other words, the mouth is the authorized place for receiving the food, and then the whole body is nourished. I remember it was at a Rath Yatra in Berkeley, 1975. And Srila Prabhupada was there speaking on a stage, and thousands of devotees there. And gave that example, and he said, I've said this so many times. Water the tree at the root, bring the food to the mouth. And suddenly something clicked, and I finally caught it, even though I had heard it so many times. This is the value of repeated hearing. What you hear sinks deeper and deeper and deeper into your core and triggers original understandings of Krishna. So Bhakti Yoga is the process of transferring the loving urge from material things to Krishna. And then we love whatever is in relation to Krishna. In material consciousness, we are trying to love that which is not at all lovable. That's a strong statement, isn't it? Trying to love that which is not at all lovable. We give our love to cats and dogs, running the risk that at the time of death, we may think of them and consequently take birth in a family of cats or dogs. Our consciousness at the time of death determines our next life. Oh, now this one is going to be hard for some of you to understand. That is one reason why the Vedic scriptures stress the chastity of women. If a woman is very much attached to her husband, at the time of death she will think of him, and in the next life she will be promoted to a man's body. Generally, a man's life is better than a woman's, because a man usually has better facility for understanding the spiritual science. Edit out. Next paragraph. But, okay? But Krishna consciousness is so nice that it makes no distinction between man and woman. Okay? So he's talking about in classic Vedic culture, which we don't have today. Some people are sad about that, and some people are glad about it. I remember just last year I was speaking at the temple in Atlanta, the USA, Sunday feast. And mostly the guests were from BART, from India, but there was one local there, shall we say. And so it was time for questions. She raised her hand. She said, I've heard that in Vedic culture, women are considered inferior. So I just looked at her and said very truthfully, we don't have Vedic culture. She was, I didn't tell her which way I felt, but it's true, we don't have Vedic culture. So, she was, oh, okay, no problem. Hare Krishna. That's right, chant Hare Krishna. But Krishna consciousness is so nice that it makes no distinction between man and woman. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, anyone who takes shelter of me, whether a woman, Shudra, Vaishya, or anyone else of low birth, is sure to achieve my association. This is Krishna's guarantee. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu informs us that in every country and in every scripture there is some hint of love of Godhead. Yes, there's some hint. Of course, even those few hints are fading these days. What comes to mind, I remember, I 18 or 19. I had flown home from university where I was living to visit the family for Christmas. And at that time, my family was, I had been away for school, but they had, in the process, they had moved to Detroit, which in the winter is very cold. And so I was just home for 3 weeks Christmas break, and it was a few days before Christmas. And so my mother had this great idea what she and my brothers and sisters were going to do. And she wanted us all to go in the neighborhood, house to house, in front of each house, and sing Christmas songs. Ooh. I was 19, my middle brother was 17 and a half. We're thinking, oh my God, what will the girls in the neighborhood think? Of course, we were goody-goodies. We didn't know any girls in the neighborhood. We were too busy studying. But anyway, oh no, our reputation in the neighborhood. We're going to go from house to house, and it's cold out there. You ever seen that happen? It's Christmas caroling? No, it's New Zealand. I think I'm mad. You know what does everyone know what it is? You've seen it maybe on TV or in movies. You go, the group stands in front of, on the pavement in front of the house, and you sing, Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. And then you finish the song, and then you go to the next house and sing in front of that. So I was panicking. I can't believe this. My mother was so focused. Come on, children. Let's go to the next house. So I remember turning to my 17-and-a-half-year-old brother. I said, look, we got to get out of this somehow. So I said, I got an idea. Mother, we're cold. It's cold out here. Appeal to her motherly instincts, We're all so cold. Do we have to go to another house? We want to do it, but it's just cold. She thought a while. All right, children. I don't want you to get sick. We'll go back to the house. We'll go back home. So, yes, there's a hint there of love of God. So therefore, as we read, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu informs us that in every country and in every scripture, there is some hint of love of Godhead. But no one knows what love of Godhead actually is. The Vedic scriptures, however, are different in that they can direct the individual in the proper way to love God. Other scriptures do not give information on how one can love God, nor do they actually define or describe what or who the Godhead actually is. Although they officially promote love of Godhead, they have no idea how to execute it. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives a practical demonstration of how to love God in a conjugal relationship. Taking the part of Srimati Radharani, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tried to love Krishna as Radharani loved him. Krishna was always amazed by Radharani's love. How does Radharani give me such pleasure? He would ask. In order to study Radharani, Krishna lived in her role and tried to understand himself. This is the secret of Lord Chaitanya's incarnation. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna, but he has taken the mood and role of Radharani to show us how to love Krishna. Thus the author writes in the 5th verse, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Lord, who is absorbed in Radharani's thoughts. Eyes are tearing up because of no glasses. So what is Lord Chaitanya doing? He's Krishna coming to investigate 3 things, all about Srimati Radharani. He wants to understand the glory of her love. In other words, what's it like to be in her position? Krishna's the beloved, and Radharani is loving him. What's it like to be in her position? Krishna can understand everything except that, because he doesn't have the position of Srimati Radharani. So he wants to know, what's the glory of her love? What's it like to be in her position? What's it like for her to love me? Well, that's number 1. Number 2, what are the wonderful qualities in Krishna that Srimati Radharani alone experiences? If anyone in the material world would talk like this, you would think they're unlimitedly conceited. What are my glories? What's it like to love me? What's in me that the lover tastes in me? I remember one famous Hollywood movie star. He said like that. He said, when I look in the mirror, I think I would date myself. And the poor man fell off a horse and was paralyzed. Poor man. I feel sorry. But Krishna can actually say that. What's it like when devotees love me, especially Srimati Radharani? What are they tasting in me? I can't understand this as Krishna. So I will take the role of my own devotee, and then I can understand. So this is why Lord Chaitanya is Radha Krishna combined. He's Krishna taking the emotions and position of Srimati Radharani. So much so that Krishna, who's dark blue like a rain cloud, becomes golden, influenced by the emotions and effulgence of Srimati Radharani. So he wants to understand, what's it like to be in her position of loving me? What are the wonderful qualities that only she can taste? Wonderful qualities in me. And number 3, what is the happiness that she's experiencing by loving me? So that is the mystery, the inner mystery of the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. Krishna taking on the emotions and complexion of Srimati Radharani. So this is not simply the best, but practically speaking, it's the only way to understand Radha Krishna in this day and age. You can't, it's too baffling unless you approach through Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's why Chaitanya Charitamrita is considered the pinnacle of Vaishnava literature. Bhagavad Gita is the undergraduate study, Srimad Bhagavatam is the graduate study, and Chaitanya Charitamrita is the postgraduate study.
Do you want to borrow some glasses, David?
Next, this brings up the question of who Srimati Radharani is and what Radha Krishna is. Actually, Radha Krishna is the exchange of love but not ordinary love. Please remember this point. Radha and Krishna is the exchange of love. Krishna has immense potencies, of which 3 are principal: the internal, the external, and the marginal potencies. In the internal potency, there are 3 divisions: Samvit, Hladini, and Sandini. The Hladini potency is Krishna's pleasure potency. So we talked about that. All living entities have this pleasure-seeking potency, for all beings are trying to have pleasure. Anyone here deny that? This is the very nature of a living entity. At present, we are trying to enjoy our pleasure potency by means of the body in the material condition. It's amazing how we think this body is meant to give me a good time. It's meant to give me pleasure. Yes, there's birth, death, disease, and old age, but that's in the background. In the foreground are my attempts to enjoy the body, my hopes to enjoy the body. Even though the body embraces the spirit soul for a short time and then disappears, still, the false ego is thinking, I am this body, I am this mind. So we're expressing our original pleasure potency that the spirit soul, the Atma has. We're expressing that through the material body, through the material atmosphere, and therefore there's distortion, there's perversion. By bodily contact, we are attempting to derive pleasure from material sense objects. But we should not entertain the nonsensical idea that Krishna, who is always spiritual, also tries to seek pleasure on the material plane. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes the material universe as a non-permanent place full of miseries. Why then would he seek pleasure in matter? Of course, we can ask ourselves, why would we seek pleasure in matter? But we've gone nuts. Under the influence of the material energy, we're deranged. He is the super soul, the supreme spirit, and his pleasure is beyond the material conception. To learn how Krishna enjoys pleasure, we must study the first 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, and then we should study the 10th canto. To learn how Krishna enjoys pleasure. You might say, well, why is that so crucial? All right, Krishna's got his pleasure. What about me? Where's my pleasure? But because we are part of Krishna, the more we become fascinated by Krishna's pleasure, the more we taste real pleasure. Again, as I often explain, we're hung up on trying to be the direct enjoyer. We think that by being the indirect enjoyer, by contributing to Krishna's pleasure, and then we get our pleasure as an echo of Krishna's pleasure, we think that's going to be deficient. You make a mundane calculation. I know what it's like to hear what my friends or relatives, when they try to tell me how they had a good time. What does it do for me? Yeah, if they're close friends, you may feel a little bit happy for them. Oh, good on you. But it doesn't really satisfy your core. In fact, you may get a little envious, right? Why does he or she have all the fun? What about me? You ever had that happen to you? Some friends, some relatives? You should have been there, it was great. Oh, we just came on our overseas, we came from our overseas experience. on the beach in Greece. It was really nice. And they need to express that to you in order to amplify their tiny pleasure. And they're hoping you're going to give them a boost. Oh, you're so fortunate. Oh, that was great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. But inside you're thinking, But by hearing about Krishna's pleasure, by trying to understand Krishna's pleasure, you get the highest perfection in life. We should study the 10th canto, in which Krishna's pleasure potency is displayed in his pastimes with Radharani and the damsels of Braja. Unfortunately, unintelligent people turn at once to the sports of Krishna in the Dashama Skanda, the 10th canto. Krishna's embracing Radharani or his dancing with the cowherd girls in the Rasa dance are generally not understood by ordinary men because they consider these pastimes in the light of mundane lust. They foolishly think that Krishna is like themselves and that he embraces the gopis just as an ordinary man embraces a young girl. Some people thus become interested in Krishna because they think that his religion allows indulgence in sex. This is not Krishna Bhakti, love of Krishna, but prakrita sahajya, materialistic lust. To avoid such errors, we should understand what Radha Krishna actually is. Radha and Krishna display their pastimes through Krishna's internal energy, not the material energy. The pleasure potency of Krishna's internal energy is a most difficult subject matter. And unless one understands what Krishna is, one cannot understand it. Krishna does not take any pleasure in this material world, but he has a pleasure potency. Very important point. Krishna does not take any pleasure in this material world, but he has a pleasure potency. And then, as we talked about earlier, because we are part and parcel of Krishna, the pleasure potency is within us also. But we are trying to exhibit that pleasure potency in matter. Very scientific. If you can assimilate all this, you'll save yourself so much trouble. Because you can't stop trying for pleasure potency, trying to express it. You can't stop from trying to express it. What are you going to do with it? So remember, the Bhakti Yoga process is all about transferring your loving impulse, transferring it from matter to Krishna. And that's why devotional service is so important. The more loving your devotional service becomes, the more Krishna is attracted to it. In the beginning, you engage in devotional service by prescription. Just like the doctor says, you must take this pill and that capsule. You must do this, you must do that. Just like one doctor devotee in Auckland, Dalini Kanta Prabhu, told me, I have to eat more. Generally, doctors tell you to eat less, eat more. It's actually, once you get used to it, it's very convenient not eating much. You get used to it. So my point is that in the beginning, devotional service is performed under injunction, ruling. You must do like this, you must do like that. But that's not meant to be all there is to bhakti. That's why it's so important for us to read Nectar of Devotion. You find out there is spontaneous love of Krishna, in which you do things for Krishna because you just naturally feel like doing that. But in the beginning, those natural feelings are submerged under countless lifetimes of material indulgence. But by following the process of bhakti, under regulation, following the doctor's orders, gradually your original spiritual health returns. Because we are part and parcel of Krishna, the pleasure potency is within us also, but we are trying to exhibit that pleasure potency in matter. Krishna, however, does not make such a vain attempt. So what does Krishna do? He never makes the mistake of trying to enjoy matter. So what's the object of Krishna's pleasure potency? The object of Krishna's pleasure potency is Radharani. So then you wonder, who is this Radharani? You've just heard that Krishna never makes the mistake of enjoying matter, and that the object of his pleasure potency is Radharani. Who is she? Sometimes people say, who's that girl with Krishna? It was here at the Bhakti Lounge years ago. One tourist from Japan, one Japanese young woman came, and some or other she had, I guess on the cover of the books or whatever, she had seen photos of paintings of Krishna, of Radha and Krishna. So you know what? She came up to me and said, who's the girl with him? I want to get rid of her. True story. How to get rid of her? I want him. So she had some realization, though it was a bit twisted. The object of Krishna's pleasure potency is Radharani. Krishna exhibits his potency as Radharani and then engages in loving affairs with her. So in other words, Krishna is self-sufficient. He's not going outside himself. His energy is his. Whereas when we want to exhibit our pleasure potency, we always have to go outside of ourselves. We're not self-sufficient. Is my body healthy? Is my mind free of worry? How's the weather? Do I have enough money? Will whoever I'll be with, will they cooperate? So many ifs, 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 ifs. But Krishna doesn't go through all that. He exhibits his internal potency, his energy. He's self-sufficient, Atmarama, self-satisfied. And then engages in loving affairs with his internal potency. Try doing that. First, let's see you exhibit your pleasure potency, and then try to engage in loving affairs with it. No, you need someone else, or some other persons. That's why in adverts, when there's advertising some food or some drink, there'll always be a convivial scene of others around, because that's real enjoyment on the mundane plane. Real meaning human beings think that's where it's at. Yeah, eating food with good friends, drinking with good friends. So they won't show you someone alone savoring some food or drink. It's always a convivial social scene. In other words, the adverts are urging you, show your pleasure potency. Get some friends around you. Are you a loser? Are you a loner? Where's your partner, at least for the weekend? Come on, get into it. But Krishna is self-sufficient. That's why he's called Atmarama. He never goes outside of himself to enjoy. He has his pleasure energy, which is unlimited. In other words, Krishna does not take pleasure in this external energy, but exhibits his internal energy, his pleasure potency as Radharani. He exhibits his internal energy, his pleasure potency as Radharani, and then enjoys with her. Thus, Krishna manifests himself as Radharani in order to enjoy his internal pleasure potency. Of the many extensions, expansions, and incarnations of the Lord, this pleasure potency is the foremost and chief. So I thought this would be a good introduction for Radhastami.